I was going to ask you about whether or not a Marxist analyzes the current preoccupation with social justice type issues or implicit endorsements of the same in the corporate world. Like I had Dylan Mulvaney and Budweiser in mind. Does the Marxist interpret this or analyze this as like cynical behavior in the pursuit of profit? And it sounds like
Yeah,
yes.
I'm not sure I want to use the word cynical.
Well, analyzes it cynically. I mean, they think that the person is doing it based on
Yeah.
uh,
So
self-interest.
if that's what you mean by cynical, okay. But Marx is generally not big on comments on motives. I mean, if capitalists, sign on to diversity, it's because they think it's good for business. And indeed, that's how diversity was first promoted in the 1970s.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this is worth commenting on if you didn't know this.
Oh, no, definitely.
The original rationale for affirmative action, which started with President Kennedy, was pretty simple, which is the United States, half the United States was a de jure apartheid state, and the other half of the United States was a de facto apartheid state, right, to the disadvantage of blacks. Okay, and Kennedy and then Johnson after him, they came along and they said, look, this has got to end. We're going to change the law, right? And we've got to try to compensate, for 2 centuries or more of abuse and degradation of this, entire segment of the population based on their race, right? So we're going to have preferences for blacks in jobs and admissions and so on, right? Because they are starting from a place well behind any of the whites they're competing with. And that became very unpopular very quickly as part of the general backlash to the civil rights revolution in the 1960s in America. And corporate America actually came up with the idea that, well, no, affirmative action isn't about justice for black people, right? Which is what it was really about, right? There'd been this grotesque injustice, and now we're going to try to rectify it in some measure. They said, no, that's not what it's about. What it's about is promoting diversity, and diversity is good for business. With the workforce is better, works better. It's better for business if we have a diverse workforce. And that's where diversity came from, and then it got constitutionalized by the U.S. Supreme Court. And to this day, right, corporate America is on board with that. Now, if you ask, why did corporate America get on board with this? One possibility is, of course, they were moved by a sense of racial justice. And that doesn't seem to be the explanation. That maybe is what you're referring to as the cynical part. The simpler explanation, which is almost surely the correct explanation, is that they did discover that diversity was good for business, right? Because one effect of the end of apartheid in America, together with the affirmative action, is very large numbers of black people suddenly became consumers with money, right? They became middle class, upper middle class, even upper class, right? In much greater numbers than prior to the civil rights revolution and prior to affirmative action. And so indeed, there was a way in which it became now good for business. And of course, as the United States has become more racially and ethnically diverse, the diversity, ideology is helpful on many fronts. You've got your Asian American consumers, right? You've got your Hispanic consumers, and so on. So that I think is why it's triumphed. Or in the wake of the murder of George Floyd by that sadistic police officer in Minneapolis, right? I mean, corporate America really took that one up, right? Big time. Okay. Now, the curious thing about the murder of George Floyd is he fit 2 different relevant demographics, only one of which got any attention. One demographic was he was black. The other demographic was that he was poor and economically marginalized. And it turns out that police killings, who do police kill? It turns out they kill overwhelmingly the poor and the economically marginal. They also kill a disproportionate number of blacks, but they actually kill them in proportion to their being poor and economically marginal. Right? that part of the narrative of what happened to George Floyd was lost, and it became entirely the race issue, right? And it's easy for corporate America to get on board that because it's consistent with their, the diversity stuff that they've been embracing for 40 or 50 years, right? If instead the murder of George Floyd had been framed as yet another poor person who's a victim of police violence, and those are the main victims of police violence, corporate America wouldn't have been so thrilled with that because, it would be quite easy to eliminate poverty, but it would be difficult to do so consistent with the pursuit of profit. Let's put it that way, right? So the race narrative is much more appealing than the poverty narrative, and that's the one that rises to, that comes to dominate the public ideology and the discussion of this incident, right? And so, you get some Ibram Kendi, right, who's a world-class race grifter, as they say, corporate America loves him, right? Because nothing he says is at all threatening to corporate America, right? Nothing he says. Corporate America is not so fond of Bernie Sanders because Bernie Sanders cuts a little closer to the essence, which is that the pursuit of profit would be harder in Bernie Sanders' world. In Ibram Kendi's world, it's easy as you can be. All you have to do is make sure you have a certain number of black people on your corporate board. No problem, right? Then you've done your so-called anti-racist effort, and you can keep extracting profit from the system.